If you've ever looked at a successful photography business and wondered how they made it look so steady, there's something you probably didn't see. Not the marketing, not the pretty feed, not the gear, the sacrifice phase. The quiet stretch where things feel heavy, uncertain, and not yet rewarding. And almost nobody talks about that part honestly. In this video, I am going to do just that. Let's start with something real. Building a photography business has a phase that is not glamorous, it's not inspiring, it's not aesthetic, it's not fun to post about. It's the phase where you are working harder than your results reflect. And that gap feels personal. This is what I call the sacrifice phase. It's the stretch where you're investing time, investing money, investing emotional energy, you're saying no to other things, you're questioning yourself quietly, but externally, it doesn't look impressive yet. That disconnect is brutal. Because when effort and visible reward don't match, doubt enters. And doubt whispers, maybe this isn't working. Maybe I'm behind. Maybe I should pivot. Maybe I should quit. But here's what's rarely said clearly. Every stable photography business went through this phase. It's not a mistake. It's a threshold. The problem is that social media compresses timelines. You see the after. You don't see the middle. And the middle is where most people quit. Let's define this phase clearly. The sacrifice phase is when you are doing more back-end work than creative work. You are building systems instead of seeing immediate growth. You are refining pricing before it feels comfortable. You are saying no to income that doesn't align. You are choosing long-term positioning over short-term relief. That's not glamorous, but it's foundational, and most photographers misinterpret this phase as failure. It's not failure, it's restructuring. Let's pause here. If you've been feeling like you're putting in effort without visible traction, I want you to hear this. That does not automatically mean it isn't working. It may mean you're in the phase where identity is being rebuilt. Because building a business isn't just about skill, it's about who you are willing to become. That's heavier. Skill growth is measurable. Identity growth is not. Now let's talk about the emotional cost. During this phase, you might feel isolated, question your pricing, compare constantly, second-guess your direction, wonder if you're wasting time. And the hardest part? There's no applause yet. No clear validation, no obvious payoff. This is the part where you are building roots underground, and roots are invisible. But without them, nothing stable grows. Let's reframe something important. Sacrifice does not mean suffering endlessly. It means trading short-term comfort for long-term clarity. That's different. You might sacrifice free weekends, certain social time, immediate financial comfort, fast pivots, in exchange for structured workflow, stable pricing, defined positioning, and a clear client experience. That trade feels heavy in the moment, but without it, growth stays chaotic. Now here's the part no one wants to admit. Some photographers avoid the sacrifice phase by constantly pivoting. They change niches, change branding, change pricing, chase trends, rework everything repeatedly. Pivoting feels productive, but sometimes pivoting is just avoidance of commitment. Commitment is uncomfortable, because once you commit, you can't blame uncertainty anymore. You have to endure refinement. Refinement is quiet, repetition-heavy, not exciting. But repetition builds strength. Now let's talk about comparison. Comparison is most dangerous during the sacrifice phase, because you're already questioning. You see someone booking out, someone raising prices, someone launching a course, someone announcing success, and your brain says, they skipped this part, they're ahead, I must be doing something wrong. They didn't skip it. You just didn't see it. No one posts year 2, refining back-end systems. Month 8, unsure but continuing. Quarter 3, slow but stabilizing. Those posts don't perform well, but they are real. This is where maturity begins, when you stop expecting visible reward for invisible work, and that shift changes everything. Now let's address something uncomfortable. The sacrifice phase feels longest when your motivation is validation. If you're building for applause, this phase will feel unbearable. If you're building for stability, this phase feels purposeful. That difference matters. Let's do a pause and reframe moment. If this season feels heavy, it does not automatically mean you chose wrong. It might mean you chose seriously. And seriousness requires endurance. Not drama, not burnout. Endurance. In the next section, we're going to talk about what the sacrifice phase actually builds, how to know if you're in it versus just misaligned, and how to move through it without burning out. Because there is a difference between sacrifice and self-destruction, and we need to name it clearly. If this is resonating already, comment below. Have you felt this phase before? Not the highlight reel, the quiet middle. Let's normalize it. Now that we've named the sacrifice phase, we need to separate it from something dangerous. Because sacrifice is not the same as self-destruction. And if we don't draw that line clearly, this conversation becomes unhealthy. The sacrifice phase is not chronic exhaustion. It's not ignoring your health or financial recklessness or working around the clock without boundaries. It's not saying yes to everything out of fear. That's not sacrifice. That's instability disguised as effort. The sacrifice phase is much quieter than that. It looks like doing back-end work when no one sees it, refining systems instead of chasing trends, saying no to misaligned bookings, holding pricing steady even when you feel nervous, investing time into workflow instead of constant marketing noise. It's subtle, and subtle work doesn't get applause, but it builds foundation. Let's talk about what this phase is actually creating, because if you don't understand what it's building, it just feels like loss. It's building identity. Early in business, most photographers are experimenting. That's normal. You try different styles, different niches, different price structures, different messaging. Experimentation is necessary, but eventually, there comes a point where experimentation must narrow. That narrowing feels like sacrifice. Because narrowing means you don't say yes to everything. You don't pivot weekly, you don't change direction impulsively. You pick something, and you refine it. Refinement builds identity. Identity builds authority. Authority builds stability. But refinement feels slow, and slow feels uncomfortable in a culture that glorifies speed. Now let's talk about revenue honestly. The sacrifice phase often includes a period where income feels inconsistent. You may be investing in education, gear, website upgrades, software, branding, systems. Money may be flowing out before it stabilizes flowing in. That imbalance creates anxiety, and anxiety triggers reactivity. This is where many photographers panic and undo structure. They discount heavily, underprice, overbook, say yes to things that don't align. Because short-term relief feels urgent, but short-term relief often disrupts long-term structure. Here's the hard truth. There is a stretch where you are choosing future stability over present comfort. That's the trade. And it's uncomfortable, but it's temporary. If, and this matters, if you are building correctly. Now let's differentiate something important. There are two types of discomfort in business: growth discomfort and misalignment discomfort. Growth discomfort feels heavy but purposeful. You're tired but moving, uncertain but progressing, challenged but structured. Misalignment discomfort feels chaotic and confusing. You're tired and directionless, busy but unclear, moving but unstable. If you are constantly restructuring your identity, you're not in the sacrifice phase. You're in misalignment. The sacrifice phase has direction. It just doesn't have applause yet. That's a big distinction. Let's pause here. If you're feeling heavy but clear on where you're headed, that's growth discomfort. If you're feeling heavy and unclear, that's misalignment. And misalignment requires reevaluation. Growth requires endurance. Now let's talk about systems. A huge part of the sacrifice phase is building systems that don't feel exciting. Workflow, client experience, pricing structure, communication boundaries, editing consistency. These are not viral topics, but they are stability multipliers. When you build systems during this phase, you are creating something that future growth won't collapse. That's what mature businesses do. They don't just chase revenue. They reinforce infrastructure. Infrastructure is invisible, but without it, everything wobbles. Let's talk about saying no. One of the hardest sacrifices in early business is turning down income that doesn't align. You might say no to clients who want heavy discounts, shoots outside your niche, work that disrupts your structure, projects that dilute your positioning. Saying no feels risky, but every yes shapes identity. And identity compounds. If you say yes to everything, your brand becomes blurred. Blurred brands struggle long-term. Clear brands endure. This is where maturity shows up again. Short-term income versus long-term positioning. And sometimes sacrifice means choosing positioning. Now let's address burnout honestly. The sacrifice phase should feel stretching, not destructive. If you are chronically exhausted, resentful, physically deteriorating, financially collapsing, that is not the sacrifice phase. That is unsustainable overextension, and that requires boundary repair. Sacrifice is controlled. Self-destruction is chaotic. You must know the difference. Now, here's something subtle. During this phase, you may feel like you're behind peers. But business maturity is not a race. Some photographers grow quickly and stabilize later. Some stabilize early and grow steadily. Neither is superior. But rapid growth without structure often collapses. Slow stabilization builds resilience. This is where patience becomes strategy. Patience is not passive. It's consistent repetition without emotional volatility. Let's do a reflective beat. Think about where you were 1 year ago. Not in visible metrics. In clarity. In structure. In identity. Have you become clearer? More defined? More intentional? That's growth. Even if income hasn't skyrocketed, even if followers haven't exploded, even if bookings feel uneven, clarity compounds before revenue does. That's a pattern most people don't see. Now let's talk about legacy. If you want a business that lasts 5, 10, 15 years, there must be a phase where you prioritize infrastructure over excitement. And that phase is the sacrifice phase. You are building something durable. Durability is not flashy, but it's rare. In the final section, we're going to talk about how long this phase lasts, how to move through it strategically, and when it's time to shift from sacrifice to scaling. Because this phase is not permanent, it's transitional, but only if handled correctly. Ready to go there? Now we need to answer the question that's probably sitting quietly in your mind. How long does this phase last? Because sacrifice without an endpoint feels hopeless, and that's not what this is. The sacrifice phase is not permanent, it's transitional. But here's the truth. It lasts as long as refinement is incomplete. Not as long as effort is high. Effort does not end this phase. Clarity does. You move out of the sacrifice phase when your workflow is stable, your pricing is consistent, your positioning is clear, your communication is structured, your editing is predictable, and your identity feels chosen rather than reactive. Notice what's missing from that list. Follower count, revenue milestones, viral moments, those are outcomes. This phase ends when structure locks, not when applause arrives. That's a big mindset shift. Let's reframe something important. You are not in the sacrifice phase because you're not making enough money yet. You're in it because you're stabilizing something. And stabilization precedes scaling. Now let's talk about scaling honestly. Scaling is when your systems carry weight without collapsing. If you try to scale before stabilizing, growth amplifies chaos. More clients, more emails, more edits, more pressure. And if the structure underneath is unstable, stress multiplies. This is why some photographers grow fast and burn out fast. They skipped refinement, they chased revenue, revenue came, structure failed. That collapse looks like drastic rebrands, sudden niche pivots, massive pricing swings, emotional exits. That's not maturity, that's instability under pressure. The sacrifice phase prevents that. It is where you quietly reinforce the foundation so growth doesn't break you. Now let's talk about emotional endurance. One of the hardest parts of this phase is not the work, it's the invisibility. You are working hard, but externally it may look quiet. And quiet seasons test ego. You don't get constant validation, rapid applause, or dramatic wins. You get incremental improvement. Incremental improvement is boring, but it's powerful. And mature photographers learn to value boring. Let's do a pause and reframe moment. If your progress feels slow, ask yourself, is it slow or is it stable? Because stable growth feels slower than chaotic spikes, but stable growth lasts. Now let's address something uncomfortable. Some photographers don't leave the sacrifice phase because they never stop sacrificing. They keep overextending, keep undercharging, keep saying yes, keep ignoring boundaries. Sacrifice is strategic, not permanent self-denial. At some point, the structure you built must begin to support you. If it never does, something is misaligned. You are allowed to transition from building to benefiting. That shift happens when you stop constantly reinventing, stop second-guessing pricing every week, stop chasing trends, and start trusting your systems. Trust is the turning point. When you trust your structure, growth becomes less emotional. Now let's talk about identity again. Early in business, you ask, can I do this? In the sacrifice phase, you ask, is this worth it? After the sacrifice phase, you begin to ask, how do I refine this? That's maturity, not hustle, not desperation, refinement. And refinement is where longevity lives. Let's zoom out. If you're currently in a heavy season, refining, stabilizing, choosing clarity over chaos. That does not mean you're behind. It means you're reinforcing. And reinforcement is invisible until it's tested. When a busy season hits and you handle it calmly, that's reinforcement paying off. When inquiries increase and your pricing holds steady, that's reinforcement paying off. When editing feels predictable instead of overwhelming, that's reinforcement paying off. The sacrifice phase is not about suffering. It's about strengthening. Now let's speak directly for a moment. If you've been questioning whether this is worth continuing, ask yourself, are you tired of photography or are you tired of instability? Those are not the same. If you're tired of instability, structure fixes that. If you're tired of photography itself, that's a different conversation. But many photographers misinterpret structural fatigue as creative fatigue, and that leads to unnecessary exits. Now let's connect this to something tangible. If this video resonated with you and you want a deeper structured exploration of this phase, what it costs, what it builds, and how to move through it intentionally, I wrote an entire short book on this. It's called The Sacrifice Phase Nobody Talks About When Building a Photography Business. It's not a hype book, it's not a marketing playbook, it's a grounded look at this middle season. If you're in it, it will feel validating. If you've passed it, it will feel familiar. If you haven't reached it yet, it will prepare you. The link is in the description. And inside that book, I also talk about what comes after, including when mentorship makes sense and when it doesn't. Now let's close with something steady. The sacrifice phase is not proof you chose wrong. It's proof you chose seriously. And seriousness requires endurance. But endurance without structure becomes burnout. Endurance with structure becomes stability. You don't need applause to keep going. You need clarity. And clarity compounds. If this conversation felt honest and helpful, subscribe. We don't glamorize business here. We build it. Comment below. Are you in the sacrifice phase right now or looking back at it? Normalize the middle, because the middle is where real businesses are built. I'll see you in the next one.